My name is Richard Henshaw. I'm a Senior Product Manager with Ansible. And before Joe goes into the sort of details of the talk, we wanted to just give a little bit of background and context on why this is an important topic and why it's important to both Ansible and CyberArk. And for those of you, hopefully everyone's familiar with Ansible, if you're in the talk, in our core messaging around what Ansible is and what it's there for how we approach it for users, we have this simple, powerful, agentless message. And the important part here is the simple for this conversation. And that's very much around, the way that we work with technology partners to make different capabilities available to you as the Ansible users, the Ansible community, and how you can do more things, given that we as Ansible are a specialist automation tool. We are not a credential management tool, right? And we have no intention of being a specialist credential management tool. So the real power is when we can combine really powerful tools that specialize in different things together in one place so that you can use all of those together in the easiest way possible. And the reason for that is very much around that, Ansible, whether it's the left-hand side, Ansible Core as the project, or Ansible Tower as the Red Hat product, it's very much around we're looking to solve automation and orchestration. We're not really looking to solve the nuances of what security tries to do in the day-to-day jobs in your enterprises, in your companies, in your organizations. What we want to make sure is that you can apply good security practice through automation and use security tooling in your automation to form that full end-to-end in the correct way. So there's various things that happen. So Tower provides role-based access control. We have the different API integrations to different systems so you can hook everything together. But there's no specific security features baked into the product at the same level as what companies like CyberArk offer. And then secondly, when it comes to security, Ansible itself really only respects the security credentials or the level of access that you have on a host when you're executing against that host, right? So there's no real, you can't really remove the credentials from the host away from the person who's executing the Ansible playbooks. If you're on a user and you want to be able to escalate, you have to provide whether it's the SSH key or whether it's a password, you have to provide that into the runtime for it to be able to execute. There is no break, no separation of control or regular separation of duties between you, the user, and you, the person with the security authority. And now, for some organizations, that's absolutely fine, right? And so for that end, in Tower and Ansible, we have things like Ansible Vault, with a Vault available in Tower, so that we can secure those credentials that you do make available as best as we can in the product set that we have. But there's always those companies and organizations where that's not enough, right? And that separation is required, that extra level of control is required. And that's when we then look to our technology partners, like CyberArk, who we can then have operate within the Ansible environment in a way that for you as the user makes everything as seamless and easy as possible. So this was really the context we just wanted to set about what Ansible is, right, and what it's intended for, and why there are always going to be reasons that we need to partner with other organizations, other products, that need to be used. And an important part of this as well is this whole, collaboration between CyberArk and Ansible came about through customer request, right? So so for those of you in the room, this is the important thing. It's your request to us and CyberArk that helps us understand these things need to happen, right, based on how you want to use the technologies that you're trying to do so that we can solve the problems that you need to try and solve. All right, so with that, I will say thank you for giving me the first few minutes. I'll ask Joe to go up on stage and carry on and actually tell you the things you probably wanted to hear about. Thanks. Cheers. Thanks, Joe.
Hey, everybody. So my name is Joe Garcia, like he said. I am a global corporate solutions engineer in DevOps for CyberArk. So I specifically cover DevOps, dynamic security, things like that. Started off dealing with more static security on-premise type situations when I started with CyberArk. But luckily, my experience from my former employer, Raymond James Financial, dealing with automation there, et cetera, I was able to apply that and easily jump into the DevOps space as we started to enter there. So I want everybody to take a look around real quick, because it looks like to me that over 75% of these seats are empty. And based on our most recent survey, threat landscape survey, we found that, hey, look, 75% of organizations don't have a privileged account security plan for DevOps. This proves it right here. So I want to thank everybody first and foremost for coming and being serious about security in your CI/CD pipelines, in Ansible, wherever you guys have automation running, because honestly, if you're not looking at it today, it's going to come back to bite you at the end. So the sooner that you can get this worked in and start to utilize a lot of the best practices and things that we found from our case studies with customers that I'm going to talk to you about today, the better off you'll be in the future, and the happier developers will be too. We'll get into that more here in a sec. Fewer than half of the report that we did here on this threat landscape survey reported that DevOps and security teams don't consistently work together. So that is also another issue. You can't have automation taking place where there's no oversight or auditing from an enterprise level there. How do you know what's going on? I know there's code there, but how do I know that the code hasn't changed when I wasn't looking? I have no oversight. So we're trying to solve that problem here. And the worst part of all is that security and DevOps teams that we surveyed couldn't even give us a good idea of where their secrets were located throughout their landscape. So we have tools that we'll talk about today that can actually dive in and discover that information for you, all those secrets, and audit them, bring them back, and report them to you. So let's talk a little bit about the new norm now. This new norm is essentially your new IT department now. You know, everybody is dealing with a DevOps methodology, going into continuous integration, continuous delivery. Everything is becoming microservices and containers. You know, we started off 15 years ago with CyberArk dealing with monolithic applications. Super simple to secure because, you know, we're talking about a 12 to 18-month release period here, whereas today, where we're all dealing with the DevOps methodology and we're dealing with a lot more automation, we're seeing release cycles increase to possibly 7 days or even just daily releases coming out now. So not only do we need to worry about the identity of human users and the privileged accounts that they're accessing, but now we have all this automation in place. How do I identify that? CyberArk came up with the idea of application identity. So we're not just worried about the human user's identity and what they're accessing, but now we can place an identity on an application and track what that application is trying to grab, whether it's a secret, a key, an access key, whatever the case may be. So this is what the new norm is. You can see that the architecture on-premise is basically the same with the exception of two things. Anywhere that you see code here is automation. And that automation requires privileged access in most instances in order to communicate with the other things. So for example, let's see if I can figure out how to do this here. There we go. Well, without going forward. So our application server is here. We have a database server, Nix servers, IT ops tools. All of these things need to communicate with other applications, other services. And how can we track what they're doing if they don't have an established identity? So this automation that's happening right here, the code here, all of this automation that's bringing everything together into this whole ecosystem, we can now apply either an application identity, which we're going to talk about today, or alternatively, today CyberArk can now provide machine identity for your microservices, containers, your more ephemeral identities, and we can deal with that dynamic enrollment. We won't be talking about that today. I'll go over it a little bit more high level later on, but it is open sourced out there on conjure.org, so if you guys do want to take a look at it, you can and kick the tires on it. We're going to be more focused on our application identity today, and we're going to take a look at a global bank and how we deployed our solution into their Ansible environment in order to secure that. So with all of this stuff happening, like I said, there's more privileged security risk that's occurring. So attackers have a much broader landscape to go and pick and choose, and even better yet, me being an attacker mindset type person, I'm going to immediately attack all your automation because chances are you're not checking out what it's doing because you assume, hey, it's just going to run the code. That code ain't changing, so we're good to go. Well, if you're not watching what that automation is accessing from a credential perspective or even monitoring the sessions that are occurring with some sort of monitoring or gateway, then you've just lost all of your oversight, and you can't tell if something's being infected during your continuous deployment or continuous delivery, and then now you're shipping a product to customers that may have a malicious payload in it. So the whole reason that we're talking about this is honestly right here. This is the best slide that I can show you today, because this is what is occurring right now throughout CI/CD pipelines across enterprises everywhere as they move from on-premise into cloud, whether that's public, private, what have you. Each of these solutions that you see on the screen, they have their own internal way of handling credentials or secrets. Jenkins has their credential plugin. Ansible has Tower Vault. OpenShift has secrets. Even Kubernetes. I mean, everybody has their own solution. But the problem is, if I have a secret in Jenkins in order to get to GitHub or GitLab or something like that, but I also need to access that somewhere else, how am I going to manage that credential now? Even though it's not a human user, which typically most enterprises are rotating those passwords every 90 days, these are ending up staying static in these pipelines and never changing at all because we've created security islands. And what CyberArk provides is a centralized vault as well as a means to deliver securely those secrets to any of these applications, effectively erasing these walls that you see up. Because now, instead of having to rely on the internal solutions of each of these products, you can rely on us to not only store securely the credential, the secret, the access key, but we can also manage that too. We've been doing that for 15 years. It's what we do. So we can rotate secrets now, which most of these solutions can't do. If you want to change an API key because, hey, something may have happened, let's change the API key, you don't have to worry about breaking everything else that's in your pipeline because you changed it in one place and it hasn't changed anywhere else yet. You just change it with us, and everything is calling to us as they need it so that we can securely authorize that request and then deliver it if it's authorized. And that's the key there. So there's no segregation of duties here within some of these solutions. Some of them have limited audit. Some of them have some good audit. But the thing at the end of the day is, if I sent an auditor here when I was working at my last job, they're just going to turn around and tell me to go figure out where the heck all the audit data is, because either it's going to be me jumping into each of these solutions, or I'm going to have to go into an entire index long period of time through my SIM in order to try and get all the data that was shipped out to it, if the data actually made it there in the first place, which is another key to think about. So some typical security challenges when you're moving and dealing with CI/CD tools. Like I said before, the secrets and credentials are typically unmanaged and distributed across the tools. And what we want to do is centralize those, again, so that we can rotate, manage, as well as take that audit information and make ourselves a system of record, which is really what's missing from CI/CD pipelines today. There's no true system of record that you can rely on to go to and say, hey, look, here is all of the information on all of the secrets that we have, and I can easily see who accessed them, when, why, how, did they, were they denied? What's the case there? These are all things that auditors are going to start keying off to really fast if they haven't already from a CI/CD perspective. So we talked about the security islands. I'm not going to talk about that again. But one of the other benefits is really, we've talked about audit, the compliance visibility. It's a lot easier for me to be able to produce a report from within my solution based on attestation, things like that, to provide to internal or external sources. But if I were to have to do that and attest to every secret that's in every one of my DevOps tools, well, now I have the issue of, more than likely, in most common scenarios that I've ran into personally at least, we have different teams of developers that are doing different things all over the place throughout the enterprise, and they're not necessarily communicating with each other. So now you've got to turn this into a whole long process of trying to figure out who's doing what, where, why, how are we going to bring it all in, and it turns into a major thing. So what we want to do is consistently apply security access across the environment, and we can do that with a centralized solution, which is what we're talking about today. So in this global bank scenario, they are utilizing our privileged account security solution today, and they moved aggressively from on-premise and are starting to make the move in a hybrid situation right now into a public cloud space. The key here is that they haven't quite decided what public cloud space they want to go to yet. They're actually approaching it because they're utilizing us from the get-go on a project-by-project basis. So rather than saying, oh, this solution works with AWS, so let's go all in AWS, we give them the ability to have redundant cloud services regardless of where their project is easiest to live. You know, if they're dealing with Kubernetes or something like that, well, you can deploy that in GCP and deal with it there because, hey, we're cloud agnostic. We don't care where any of your secrets are going. We just want them to be stored with us, and we want those applications to ask us for them so we can identify them. So over the past year, we've been working with them to get them set up in their Ansible. They're starting off with Ansible first, and they're utilizing Ansible in order to deploy instances into these public cloud services, and it requires credentials in order to access those environments. So what we set up was based on their requirements, essentially. They had 4. Which was pretty easy to resolve, considering what we've already talked about up to this point. Automatic, secure credential rotation was number 1, first and foremost. It was something that they recognized they couldn't do with Ansible Tower, so they asked us if we could do that, provide it to Ansible, and we can. They bit hard on the idea of security islands that I spoke about. So they said immediately, like, we don't want to deal with any security islands. We want CyberArk here from the get-go, so that we can work that into our plan to completely eliminate that from ever happening. It's easy to plan for, harder to backtrack from once you've already established those islands. They wanted to enable secret rotation as well, so not just dealing with the automatic secure credential retrieval, but also rotating it as well. And then also auditability. We're talking about a global bank here. They have a ton of audit requirements that they need to supply to different auditors, external and internally. So we're going to take a look at how we did this. First, we're going to talk about how we deliver secrets or credentials to an application and how that whole process works utilizing our application identity manager today. And then we'll dive in and take a look at how we brought that into their Ansible deployment, and then how you guys can kind of go down the same path as they did, utilizing a hygiene plan that you can put into effect in your company as soon as you get back. We're using some of our free tools and stuff like that that we have available today. So we have here a server that has an application living on it, and that application needs to access a database backend. So it has credentials in order to do so. Now, you can see here that I needed to hard code this credential into the application. Not very secure to have a password sitting there in plain text in the application. There's other ways I could mask it, depending on how I'm doing it, whether it's an encrypted web.config file, whatever. At the end of the day, it's hard-coded there somewhere. And we need to completely remove any sort of password or hint of a password from this application's code. And the way that we do that is by our enterprise password vault, which is the digital vault that you see there, and our credential provider, which is installed as an agent on the server. And this is very important because it allows us to build a persistent local cache that we can use for high availability. So the network around the server can crash, but we're caching all of the credentials and secrets locally in a persistent manner, and we're keeping the access control list along with that credential there in case of a network outage. Now, you'll notice below our application we have a couple additional parameters now. This is how we handle our authorization, okay? So our application has an identity in the digital vault. That's called its application ID, or app ID if we were to shorten it even more, which is really what helps identify these authorizations. So here we have an OS user that should be making the request. It's called app1. We have a path, varlib app1, that request should be originating from on that server. And then we have the hash of the executable or that script hashed out that we can also store and check against. Now, each of those authorizations need to come back validated in order for it to get access to the credential or secret it's trying to get. Okay? Because it checked into the credential provider and it sees that it's authorized to go ahead and deliver the secret, the credential provider can turn around, grab that secret or credential from the vault, put it in its local persistent cache, and then feed it back to the application. All the application is doing is giving these 3 parameters here to a local CLI password SDK that we built. And from there, it can, once it gets the password and username and all that information back, it'll go ahead and make a connection to the database securely. And we were able to securely deliver those credentials from outside in. Now, let's take a look if somebody was trying to attack us. Maybe they could, try and duplicate the application to see if they can try and fetch the same thing that our other application did. Well, the problem is that this is a different OS user, ATT, a different path coming from etc ATT, and then a different hash as well. So we'll key off to that, and we'll deny them the access in order to be able to do that. So it's completely policy-based. It can handle secrets rotation, which I'm sure a lot of people are probably thinking right now, well, that's great and all, but what if the password's changing? And I need that password now to connect to my database. Do I just sit around and wait? Like, there's latency issues here. Things are moving pretty fast. Luckily, we have a dual account method that we can deal with, so blue-green type of scenario. And we utilize a virtual username on top that your applications would be referencing to, access for. And that virtual username has 2 accounts associated with it in our solution, in our vault. They both have the same privileges, but the difference is when one is changing their password, the other one goes active. So we're only ever serving up an active credential as the other is changing, and therefore you're never breaking your pipeline waiting for a password to rotate. We can just give you whatever the active one is while the inactive one is changing. Full audit throughout, so since the application has an identity, now instead of seeing, oh, app1 is the OS user trying to get this credential, let's just log in the audit app1. No, we've got an application identity that we can put in those audit logs so you know which application is accessing what credentials or secrets in our solution. So we have different approaches to authentication. We can do whitelisting of IP, DNS, or host name. We can do OS user, so essentially the user that is going to be running the script or application. Application's path, its hash, and that's basically it. It's really all we need. You can use all or one. It's completely up to you. And then finally, the resiliency we talked about first off, because it's agent-based, we keep that local persistent cache. It's fully encrypted, so there's no worries there. And we can continue to grab just from the credential provider itself if it cannot communicate to that vault. Honestly, if you were to make 10 calls to the credential provider from an application, we would only grab the credential once from the vault, and then we would just check on an interval to see if the password has been changed in the vault, so we keep the latency, we keep the performance hits down on our vault. Yeah, so we have a RESTful API that you can do that easily through. So there's no worries there if we can work with you to automate that process. But essentially the question was regarding binaries, and if they were to take the hash approach of authorization and the hash changed, do they need to update the hash in CyberArk? Well, yes. You don't need to manually do that. We can definitely automate that process for you so you can get the hash through the API in there in a secure manner. But yeah, we would definitely need to update that hash so that we could check against it as it's trying to make a call for the credential. Okay, so let's take a look at our Ansible deployment here that we did for this bank. This bank is managing today approximately 200,000 accounts. Some of them are used by Ansible, some of them are on-premise, local administrator root accounts, but at the end of the day, that's a lot of accounts. So we have our control node, we have our enterprise password vault, we have our managed nodes at the bottom. We install the credential provider agent on the controller node. And this allows us to now utilize a standard Python Lookup plugin that's available on Ansible Galaxy. You can just search for CyberArk and find it there. wish that this was a little bit more clear and a little bit bigger, but essentially, it's a normal lookup plugin where you're providing the query through the lookup plugin of the information of the account you want to grab. So you're giving it your safe that it's located in, you're giving the application ID, that's where we get the application ID from, and then you're giving either the username or the unique identifier in our solution of the password object. So you're giving 3 things that isn't going to get an attacker anywhere, and that's what's hard-coded in your script now, rather than the passwords themselves. Okay? And then finally, what we'll do is the lookup will utilize our credential provider in the same manner that your application would, and based on the authorizations that it finds in the access control list, it'll either deliver that into a variable or not based on that lookup plugin. Okay, so you can see here we just have the variables for the password, and then the administrator username. Well, you probably can't see it, but it's definitely there. Okay, so that is an easy way of how, here, let me go back. It's an easy way of how we deal with Ansible. This is uniform across the board. This is exactly how we would tell you to do it. So don't think that this is a unique case study here on this global bank where it's going to be completely different for your situation. The one great thing about Ansible, as we've been dealing with it, is its uniformity in the way that it handles things like this. So we have a more dynamic solution called CyberArk Conjure. This is our application identity manager. CyberArk Conjure also has a lookup plugin as well that can be utilized, and it's delivered as a Docker container. It's also open source. You can get it at conjure.org and try it out, deploy it into a Docker host, but it's essentially the same thing. If you have our enterprise password vault today, you can synchronize credentials or secrets from there up to Conjure, or it can stand alone and act as its own secure vault. So let's take a look at some simple steps here that can be utilized by anybody to secure your DevOps environment today. So first and foremost, you have to consider the need to evolve secrets management, which most people aren't even thinking in terms of secrets management, maybe from a team level, a developer team level, but from a more higher level of CI/CD tools and things like that, it's a hard discussion to have because people don't really know how to approach it. So really, the fact that you're here today is amazing because you're getting a good insight into how we would approach it. So we would first start off by assessing risks and things like that across cloud and DevOps environments. And the way that we do that is a free utility that we have available on cyberark.com. It's our discovery and audit tool. Now, we shorten it to DNA, so if you hear me say DNA, it's just my head reverting back to the acronym. But our discovery and audit tool is just an executable binary that you can run on your environment. It can latch on to LDAP, or you can feed it a list of IP addresses for servers. But essentially what it can do is go ahead and discover all the privileged account credentials that are across your environment. We've updated it recently so that now we can tie into AWS to discover EC2 instances and the information on those. But even better and more specific to this talk is our ability to find hard-coded credentials in Ansible playbooks. All you have to do is target the binary to where your Ansible playbooks live in a directory, and we'll dive in there and take an assessment of where our secrets or credentials may live in Ansible playbooks and report that back in a reportable fashion that you can utilize. Plan your plan of attack based off of that, and then go forth and know that you have full visibility into what's out there. So addressing basic cloud and DevOps hygiene first. And this isn't just from a secrets perspective. We're also talking about session management here. I know I've focused a lot on automation here, but we still have human users that need to interact with a lot of these tools. Ansible Tower, for example. You may set up a self-service for your developers to be able to deploy into their development environment in Ansible Tower, but you still want to kind of keep an eye on what they're doing while they're accessing that console's UI. Well, session isolation and monitoring is another thing that we can provide in order to do that, and it goes towards your entire security hygiene plan. We can also do a lot more than that, but at the crux of it, being able to combine the session isolation for your human users, as well as getting those hard-coded credentials out for your automated or your automation that's out there, is a great first step in the right direction. Another one is probably one that I'm a huge advocate for. I know that a lot of people like to keep DevOps and security separate, but I feel that there are a lot of really great security people out there that fit the mold of a DevOps mentality. I think that maybe it's just the same issue that we had with developers and operations before. You know, they were separated, so we married them together. We broke down that wall where they were throwing stuff over it to each other and stuff, but we didn't really break the wall down. I feel like somebody built a door between it, said, hey, ops, come over to dev, and now security's stuck on the other side of that wall. And now we're trying to get through because we see the automation going over here, and we just need to get in there so that we can kind of integrate with dev and ops. So DevOps should always include security. I don't really like the term DevSecOps because I feel like it's kind of a forced phrase. DevOps should be secure. Like, there's no question about that. So really embedding security teams, or just a couple people from your security team in there, is definitely beneficial. And then finally, embracing security engineering and security automation was probably one of the best experiences that I had at my former employer when I was working for them. Honestly, because you know, they embraced the fact that automation was coming, but we still need to secure the automation. Luckily, you know, from a financial perspective, it's really easy. They only want one thing. They want the auditing capabilities, and they want the oversight so that they don't get dinged $17 million for whatever audit requirement they didn't meet. But honestly, you know, we would like more than just to check a box, you know, on a requirement. We want to make sure that we're able to fully secure your entire landscape. And hopefully you'll allow us to do that if we're not today. So some key takeaways from this talk today is that the Ansible plugin that we went over today is available on Ansible Galaxy, as well as our Conjure Solutions Lookup plugin, as well as we have a couple roles out there. If you need to get a credential provider installed on a node, then we have a role for that. If you need to establish a machine identity on a VM, a microservice, a container, we have a role in Ansible Galaxy that can do that for you for our CyberArk Conjure offering. So definitely go out there and check that out. Also, conjure.org is the website for our secrets management tool. You can go out there and you can get linked to GitHub, where you can get our open source version. We have a hosted version that you can just sign up for and play with for 30 days. Or you can go ahead and then play with our integrations for that too. All of our integrations are built for open source, as well as our enterprise edition, so you guys can have fun with that. And finally, we just released on not on Tuesday, actually a couple weeks ago, but we press released on Tuesday an OpenShift integration for CyberArk Conjure for us to be able to securely deliver secrets to an application container in a pod without needing any tokens being passed around. It's attribute-based, but we can keep it off of the logs for OpenShift in your application container and securely inject them as environment variables, which I think is huge because most developers are developing with environment variables anyways, the way CI/CD tools are going. So the fact that we can come in and secure something without making the developers change their code is huge. And then finally, we've got a lot of useful resources out there. If you just go to cyberark.com, you can check them out and stuff like that. But I am available on Twitter, so you can hit me up on Twitter. Also, you can email me. I'm on LinkedIn as well, and I'm always happy to talk about things like this and have discussions. So after here, if you catch me and you want to talk to me or something like that, feel free to. But I definitely do want to thank you again for coming and checking out this talk on how we were able to secure that deployment. If you need any more information, again, please come up front and let me know. And thank you, guys.